staan. U kunt wel plaatsnemen.
Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Mrs. Emmaline Brouwer will defend the academic thesis called Medical Education Without Borders, the What, Why and How of International Medical Programs. Before we do the opposition, the candidate will give a short summary of the work and the most important findings and conclusions. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Geachte prorector, geachte leden van de commissie, geacht promotieteam, beste vrienden, familie, collega's, hier aanwezig en ook online. Ik deel vanochtend graag eerst in het Nederlands een paar van de belangrijkste bevindingen van mijn werk wat ik de afgelopen jaren heb gedaan. En daarvoor wil ik u eerst aan een paar mensen voorstellen. U kwam hun naam misschien al tegen in het dankwoord van dit boekje, mocht u dat hebben gelezen. Dit zijn Anthony en Isabel. Zij hebben een belangrijke rol gespeeld in dit boek. En ik wil u graag vertellen wie dit zijn. Anthony is een student die zo graag geneeskunde wilde studeren dat hij er alles voor over had. Hij wilde zelfs geneeskunde gaan studeren in het buitenland. En hij vertrok om in het Engels aan een vreemde universiteit in een vreemd land te studeren. Daarna wil hij graag terugkomen naar zijn eigen land om daar als arts te gaan werken. Isabel studeert ook geneeskunde in het buitenland, maar zij deed dat omdat ze er iets extra's zocht. Zij wilde graag een Engelstalige opleiding met nieuwe mensen, nieuwe kansen, nieuwe ontdekkingen. Zij wil later misschien wel tropenarts worden of iets anders internationaals met geneeskunde doen. Een aantal van u herkent misschien wel iets van mijzelf in Isabel. Ook ik was ooit zo'n geneeskundestudent die later misschien wel iets internationaals met haar opleiding wilde doen. Dat is gelukt. Vandaag presenteer ik u mijn proefschrift over medisch onderwijs zonder grenzen. In de afgelopen jaren deed ik onderzoek naar een bijzonder soort geneeskundeopleidingen. Internationale medische programma's zijn Engelstalige opleidingen waar studenten uit allerlei landen kunnen studeren om daarna in hun eigen land, waar dan ook ter wereld, als arts te gaan werken. Aan het begin van mijn onderzoek vond ik dat deze opleidingen overal ter wereld bestaan. Er zijn er honderden en ze concentreren zich in het Caribisch gebied. Er zijn er veel in Rusland en China, maar ook tientallen in Europa. Hier in Maastricht heet het programma ITM, International Track in Medicine. En dat programma bestaat sinds 2009. Het is gestart als een beurzenprogramma voor studenten uit het Midden-Oosten. Maar tegenwoordig kunnen daar studenten studeren vanuit alle landen die dat willen en interessant vinden. En trekt het jaarlijks tientallen studenten uit diverse landen. Ik ken dat programma goed als docent in verschillende onderwijsrollen. En vond het soms best lastig om aan die studenten met verschillende achtergronden en verschillende verwachtingen het onderwijs zo aan te bieden dat het op hen allemaal aansloot. Bovendien vormen dit soort programma's een boeiende onderzoekscontext omdat er veel aspecten van globalisering en internationalisering in samenkomen binnen het hoger onderwijs, zoals taal, interculturele communicatie, curriculuminternationalisering, migratievraagstukken en de marktwerking in het hoger onderwijs die daarbij hoort. Het onderwerp raakt ook aan vraagstukken die ik bij mijn werk bij Psycholaboratories tegenkom. Wanneer wij de wereld rondreizen, samenwerken met hogescholen, universiteiten en ziekenhuizen, vragen we ons vaak af hoe onderwijsmanieren, onderwijsinnovaties uit één land goed toepasbaar zijn in een andere taal of cultuur of context. En zo stelden we onze onderzoeksvragen voor dit project op. Welke keuzes worden er gemaakt binnen internationale medische programma's rondom de doelstellingen, de visie en de inhoud van internationale opleidingen? Oftewel, ik onderzocht het wat, het waarom en het hoe van internationale medische programma's. Niet alleen het onderwerp, maar ook de opzet van dit onderzoek was internationaal. Ik vond 8 universiteiten in 8 verschillende landen bereid om een bijdrage te leveren aan de verschillende studies van dit project. Naast ons programma in Maastricht waren dat universiteiten in Italië, Hongarije, Polen, Letland, Indonesië, Maleisië en China. Mijn proefschrift bevat 5 verschillende projecten waarin ik dit onderwerp op verschillende manieren benader. Ik deed interviews met docenten, met onderwijsmakers, met onderwijscoördinatoren en ondersteuners. Ik vervolgde een grote groep studenten van al deze verschillende opleidingen, die ik vanaf het afstuderen tot een aantal jaar daarna door middel van vragenlijsten en interviews leerde kennen en hun ervaringen hoorde over hun terugblik op de opleiding en hun eerste internationale carrière-stappen. En in de latere hoofdstukken van het proefschrift plaats ik het onderwerp in een wat bredere context, waarin ik onderzoek hoe er in academische en maatschappelijke teksten naar dit onderwerp wordt gekeken. Ik deed deze onderzoeken niet alleen. Naast mijn promotieteam hier aan tafel hebben diverse onderzoekers meegewerkt uit verschillende landen met verschillende culturele en professionele achtergronden. In totaal hebben meer dan 200 mensen uit meer dan 30 landen een bijdrage geleverd aan dit proefschrift. Ik wil nu graag 3 van de belangrijkste inzichten delen die we met dank aan dit onderzoek hebben opgedaan. Over het wat, het waarom en het hoe. Daarvoor roep ik eerst Anthony en Isabel er weer even bij. Het is misschien goed om toe te lichten dat dit geen echte bestaande individuen zijn, maar dat dit profielen zijn of portretten die ik op basis van mijn onderzoeksanalyse heb opgesteld. En zij illustreren goed de bevindingen van dit onderzoek. Het wat, dat ging over wat beogen dit soort opleidingen te bereiken voor die studenten. Wat voor dokters levert het op? Anthony en Isabel vertegenwoordigen de 2 profielen die uit deze vraag, uit de analyse naar de antwoorden van deze vraag naar voren kwam. En ik wil ze graag nader aan u voorstellen op basis van een paar rake opmerkingen die zij maakten, of quotes, een gebruikelijke manier om data te presenteren in dit type onderzoek. Anthony beschreef bijvoorbeeld: ik heb mij ingeschreven bij deze opleiding omdat het collegegeld lager was dan bij andere universiteiten en ze hadden hier geen toelatingsexamen. Die overwoog met name praktische punten. En Isabel zou bijvoorbeeld gezegd hebben: ik wilde graag een totaal nieuwe ervaring en mijzelf ontwikkelen in een nieuwe omgeving. Die was op zoek naar dat soort argumenten toen ze haar opleiding koos. Anthony en Isabel vertegenwoordigen zo ook de 2 perspectieven die docenten mij vertelden toen ik met hen sprak over het doel van deze opleidingen. Daar bleek een tweedeling te bestaan. Enerzijds was er het beeld van arts als een universeel beroep, wat overal ter wereld hetzelfde is, en dus een geneeskundeopleiding die overal ter wereld er ongeveer hetzelfde uit zou moeten zien. Een docent zei bijvoorbeeld: internationaal betekent voor ons, een algemeen diploma moet overal toepasbaar zijn. Het menselijk lichaam is hetzelfde en alle artsen moeten hetzelfde weten en hetzelfde opgeleid worden. Een beeld dat wel past bij de ideeën van Anthony die u net zag. Daarnaast bestond er het beeld van een speciaal soort arts die uit deze opleidingen zou moeten kunnen voortkomen. Misschien een werelddokter die extra kennis en vaardigheden had, die speciaal is opgeleid om overal ter wereld te kunnen werken. Een docent zei bijvoorbeeld: we willen alle belangrijke internationale onderwerpen behandelen, zodat we aan het einde zeggen dat is een internationale dokter en niet één voor alleen de Nederlandse patiënt. Die 2 profielen en de verschillende ideeën daarover maakten het wel lastig om goed onderwijs te maken voor die groep studenten. Moet een docent nou streven naar een globale, algemene, universele onderwijs voor die studenten? Of concentreren, inzoomen op contextuele verschillen, op culturele verschillen, op de diversiteit tussen de lokale contexten? Ik concludeer in mijn proefschrift dat het niet haalbaar is om een opleiding zo in te richten dat je je op alle mogelijke toekomsten, op alle verschillende mogelijke plekken kunt voorbereiden. Maar ik beveel wel aan dat het goed zou zijn om studenten adaptieve vaardigheden aan te leren, zodat ze zich flexibel kunnen aanpassen aan verschillende omstandigheden waar ter wereld ze ook werken. Dat is volgens mij wat medisch onderwijs zonder grenzen zou moeten nastreven. Het tweede deel van mijn onderzoekvraag ging over het waarom. Wat is de visie van dit soort opleidingen? Waarom hebben we deze ontwikkeld met elkaar in het medisch onderwijs? En uit mijn interviews en ook de tekstanalyse kwamen 3 ideeën tevoorschijn die naast, maar ook door elkaar bleken te bestaan. Ten eerste het beeld dat deze opleidingen met name bestaan ten behoeve van de studenten, die zo een internationaal diploma kunnen krijgen. Het tweede beeld wat naar voren kwam was het idee van een internationale opleiding met name ten bate van de universiteit, uit financieel gewin of om een internationale reputatie op te bouwen. En een derde beeld was het de maatschappij als voornaamste die gebaat is bij dit soort opleidingen, omdat het dokters oplevert die de globaliserende wereld nodig heeft. We beschreven ook 2 problemen rondom het bestaan van deze uiteenlopende en naast elkaar bestaande visies. Het eerste was dat ze geen recht doen aan de mogelijke nadelen en ethische bezwaren die er ook rondom dit soort onderwijs bestaat, zoals de marktwerking in het onderwijs dat hiermee vaak gepaard gaat, maar ook zorgen rondom de kwaliteit van onderwijs als docenten en studenten in hun tweede of soms zelfs hun derde taal met elkaar communiceren. Anthony zei daar bijvoorbeeld over dit: de taalbarrière tijdens dat onderwijs belemmerde mij om genoeg ervaring op te doen met patiëntcommunicatie en om me comfortabel te voelen in mijn rol als arts. En het tweede probleem dat we beschreven was het ontbreken van een eenduidige visie, wat zorgde voor verwarring onder docenten en voor verkeerde verwachtingen onder studenten. Isabel vertelde bijvoorbeeld dat woord internationaal werd steeds benadrukt. Dus ik verwachtte heel veel internationale docenten en medestudenten. Maar dat was niet zo in de praktijk. In het discussiehoofdstuk van mijn proefschrift pleit ik er onder andere voor dat universiteiten een eenduidige visie opstellen en deze ook helder communiceren naar hun docenten en naar buiten toe. Heel recent nog is dit ook een onderwerp in de Nederlandse politiek. Misschien heeft u gezien dat er een motie is aangenomen in de Tweede Kamer vorige week die hogescholen en universiteiten vraagt om te stoppen met de werving van internationale studenten. U zult misschien begrijpen dat ik het met deze motie oneens ben. Wellicht komen we daar zo nog over te spreken. Ik wil dan ook graag de stelling onderschrijven die de voorzitter van het college van bestuur van deze universiteit uitsprak bij de opening van het academisch jaar eerder dit jaar. Our biggest societal problems are global, and they can only be solved through international cooperation and understanding each other's background and perspectives. Dat is waarom medisch onderwijs zonder grenzen belangrijk is. Het derde en laatste onderdeel van mijn onderzoeksvraag ging over het hoe. Hoe zien die programma's er dan uit? Welke keuzes worden er gemaakt tijdens het maken van het curriculum voor deze studenten? Ik onderzocht allerlei curriculumstukken en ik sprak daarover met docenten. En ook de terugblikken van de studenten gaven ons hierover informatie. En wij leerden hoe dit soort programma's tot nu toe tot stand komen. En we konden ook een paar aanbevelingen opmaken. Ten eerste zagen we dat op de meeste universiteiten dit programma ontstond vanuit een vertaalde versie van het al langer bestaande lokale curriculum. En in sommige universiteiten werd daar vervolgens een internationaal sausje overheen gegooid. Ook hier bij ons in Maastricht werd gestreefd om extra opdrachten, extra voorbeelden, extra leerdoelen over internationale onderwerpen, over ziekteleer of zorgsystemen toe te voegen. En hier ziet u een voorbeeld van zo'n opdracht waarin studenten wordt gevraagd om te reflecteren op de verschillen die er in verschillende landen en culturele contexten bestaan rondom een ziekte als depressie. Een tweede benadering was het aansluiten bij allerlei internationale ontwikkelingen op het gebied van onderwijs. Bijvoorbeeld universiteiten die erg keken naar wat er in Amerika gebeurde, welke onderwijsontwikkelingen daar waren, zodat de studenten goed voorbereid waren op internationale of Amerikaanse licentie-examens. Terugdenkend aan Anthony en Isabel, kunt u zich misschien voorstellen dat die eerste aanpak, het toevoegen van internationale onderwerpen, goed past bij wat Isabel hoopt en verwacht van haar opleiding. En dat die tweede aanpak beter aansluit bij wat Anthony voor zichzelf voor ogen heeft. De ervaringen van Isabel en Anthony en hun collega's leerden ons ook nog iets anders. We zagen dat bijna 3/4 van de studenten na het afstuderen inderdaad in een ander land gaat praktiseren als arts. Of terug naar hun eigen land of verder naar een derde bestemming. En al die studenten vertelden ons dat zij zich op die transitie niet zo goed voelden voorbereid. En dat is een oproep aan de opleidingen om daar in hun onderwijs meer aandacht aan te besteden. Het viel ons tenslotte nog op dat dat internationale sausje in de praktijk wel vaak een vrij eenzijdig sausje was. Dat die voorbeelden over andere landen nogal vaak voorbeelden uit het mondiale zuiden waren. En dat het aansluiten bij internationale ontwikkelingen meestal aansluiten bij westerse ontwikkelingen betrof. Een laatste aanbeveling aan docenten en beleidsmakers in dit type onderwijs is dan ook om kritisch te kijken naar structuren die bewust of onbewust de ongelijkheid in de wereld in stand houden. Dat is hoe medisch onderwijs zonder grenzen zich verder zou kunnen ontwikkelen. En ik ga door, ik vervolg mijn pad en ik hoop verder te werken in iets internationaals met geneeskunde. Maar ik doe ook een paar dingen anders dan voorheen. Ik reisde dit jaar met de trein naar Denemarken, naar Barcelona en naar Lyon. Ik daag mijn studenten vaker uit om te reflecteren op de ethische, sociale en maatschappelijke aspecten van hun studie. En ik hoop mijn steentje bij te dragen aan een voortdurende academische discussie over globalisering en medisch onderwijs. Te beginnen vandaag, waar ik deze discussie met de opponenten hier aanwezig aanga. Gezien het onderwerp en de diversiteit in deze zaal, zal de verdere oppositie in het Engels plaatsvinden. Ik dank u allen voor uw aandacht. Obrigada pela sua atenção. Thank you for your attention. I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you for that very clear presentation and the messages that came with it. The opposition will now start by Professor Heinemann. She is a professor of competency-based education and assessment at this university, and she was the chair of the assessment committee of the manuscript.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, my congratulations for your thesis. It is a very respectable journey in research and in which you were able to combine your work and your passion and your interest, and I enjoyed reading it. And also my congratulations for your team and your family and those present here. Of course, I also have some points for discussion, and I wanted to start with a question and a discussion on your participants and also on the use of the data throughout your thesis. So in several chapters you mentioned that the data is part of a larger multi-center instrumental case study, and I wanted to clarify that for chapter 2 and 3 you used the same interview data because I think the description is comparable. I do see some differences. So in chapter 2 you mentioned that there were 26 participants, including an administrator and a student, and in chapter 3 there were 24 participants, and the administrator and the student is not mentioned. So was it the same data? Short yes, no answer?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your words and your question. Yes, that was the same data.
It was the same data set, okay. So the 3 included programs in chapter 2 and 3, they are very diverse. However, the participants, if it was 24 or 26, they remain a bit of a black box to me because there is no description of the characteristics, and it's difficult for me to then place the quotes that you used in the results with their role and also the program. So I think for readers and future users of your insights, it is important to know a bit more of these characteristics. So as part of your sampling, you state that the participants were either supportive or opposing of the program or of the approach. So when reading that, I thought, okay, maybe was there more opposition in one of these programs? How did you know whether they were supportive or opposive? And how did that resonate in the data? So did you see certain aspects, for instance, in the challenges? In chapter 2 and in chapter 3, you described a general positive narrative, but there may also be an alternative or an opposing view, maybe less. And because I had little insight on the characteristics, can you tell me more about maybe the negative narrative, and is that could be linked to a characteristic of the participant or of the context of the institute? Can you tell me more?
Highly esteemed opponent, I will definitely try to explain this a little bit further. In the sampling, we indeed looked for a diverse range of perspectives. That was what we were after, and we were explicitly, or in our discussions before the data collection started, we realized we should be aware that the ideas about these kind of programs are not always as positive as maybe the general idea may be. That was at least our impression also before we started, and our own impression from within our own faculty as well. So with the colleagues that we had in these different faculties that collaborated, who supported in the purposive sampling phase, we discussed that we wanted a broad range of participants for the interviews, and we defined that as broad in terms of the duration that someone was involved with the program, broad in their backgrounds, professional backgrounds, so clinicians, but also staff from the preclinical areas and their involvement in the education. And we also said it would be good to have people whom we know or whom you know are in favor of this program, are happy and enthusiastic about it, but also to not exclude those up front who may have more concerns. So the ones who selected and invited the participants across the different contexts looked for colleagues who they thought or knew would have some diverging opinions to share. And the connected question, how did that then play out in the data, was indeed that. I think difficult and maybe not desirable to put a number to that, but the majority of the people that we talked were enthusiastic and proud of what they did and happy to share how they achieved that, including the challenges that they felt. And in each context, we had maybe 1 or 2 participants that were quite critical for numerous reasons, and they shared that as well. There would be, for example, one who was very critical of teaching and studying in English if that was not the first language of neither the teacher nor the student. And this person felt that there was a lot of nuance missed in discussing certain topics that are important in medicine.
Okay, thank you for that. So one data set, then I also gathered that there was one interview guide. So when you started your studies, I think chapter 2, did you draft the interview guide with these both research questions in mind, so both for chapter 2 and chapter 3?
Yes, correct. We conducted one set of interviews with a broad range of questions, and the research questions both for chapter 2 and chapter 3 were already included in that guide.
Okay. Yeah. And then I see you also used or choose 2 different data analysis methods. So in chapter 2, you choose thematic analysis by Brown and Clark, and in chapter 3, it was template analysis by King. Can you explain the reasons for the use of these 2 different methods? Why did you do that, and what purpose did it serve? And also, assuming that you analyzed first the data for chapter 2 and that research question, that you were already familiarized with the data, were you able to put down your lenses then for the template analysis in chapter 3?
Yes, that's correct. We started with thinking about and analyzing the interviews as a whole, and then looking at the different topics. Wait, let me rephrase that. The interviews were done. There was one interview with each participant that addressed those both topics, but the analysis for the different questions indeed had a different approach. And it is because in chapter 2 we were interested in a bit more open approach to see what were challenges, experiences with curriculum design in a broader sense, what were approaches and successes and failures. And we thought the analysis would be helped by a more thematic view of what we would find in the data there. But for chapter 3, we realized already during the interviews and the initial analysis that the ethical concerns and the more sensitive topics maybe discussed there were not so present at first. I think I described that in that chapter 2, that the staff would describe their positive experience, but only upon prompting with the examples and the cases that we gave them, they would discuss the ethical challenges more. So then we felt that the template analysis, where we would already include some of those ethical concerns that we identified earlier from the literature, would give us a helpful framework to guide that analysis in that stage.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Jan Sukovic. He is a professor of health professions education at the University of Łódź in Poland.
Thank you very much. Dear candidate, I need to start from saying that when I was invited to review your work, I was really happy to see the title and the topic, because I was happy to see that finally there is someone brave enough to start doing the research in this relatively uncharted territory from the research perspective. And you know, education is a complex adaptive system, and international education is especially messy part of this system. So you are just trying to identify, and you are identifying patterns in this content. So my first question is sort of related to the first question from the previous set of questions you could hear about the participants. When you are in your first chapter identifying two categories of approaches to curriculum, the global physician and the universal professional, I'm sure that you know the concept of social desirability bias, when people give responses just to look better. So how much do you think they were adjusting the answers, and do you think that there are some programs that are not so reflective and they are just translation from the local language into English without the deeper reflection of which approach we should take?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words, and thank you for being here today. That's much appreciated. I think in response to your question, it almost referred to how you started off with stating that this is a not so much researched topic in itself, because I did indeed find also in my preliminary literature search that very little has been written about these programs, even though there are so many. So that was a first surprising finding in a way. And that little involvement in reflection or involvement in research resonates with what you stated afterwards, is this topic. And when I ask these questions, where do those answers come from? And I did experience, not everywhere and definitely not with everyone, but with some participants, that they seem to not have thought much about these questions before until I entered the room and came with my interview guide and my data collection. If then they would give me the answers that were maybe desirable, I don't know, because we did have, I felt, open and interesting interviews where at the spot a lot of them maybe thought about that for the first time, but did come up with their opinions and thoughts quite openly. Of course, I don't know what they didn't tell me, and I don't know what I would have told someone else. But I don't think we had a strong bias in that sense across the interviews.
So actually, this is very interesting what you are saying now, that in fact your questions were sort of opening the eyes of participants that such questions exist. So, you know, I really believe in action research, and I really believe in translational sciences. So what should be the next steps after we know what we know from what you did? How do you think your research should develop, but also how can we bring this research to those people who are responsible for international programs?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Of course, there are many ways how this research could be taken forward, but picking up on this particular point, an action research project indeed would be quite interesting to join in. Also some more of the critical theory perspectives that I hint towards so far, and to build on that, following suggestions maybe by Wyatt as well and Paradis, in following some participant action research with those universities that have not been involved in education research much so far, looking how the staff but also the students ideally involved in a project would together develop the programs towards something that is not a mere translation of what it was before, but a curriculum that really fits the purpose of those students and the communities that they will serve later on. I would envision, but it was difficult, I think, the first step is probably quite difficult to get those faculties on board, because I included some of them, but there are many more in this research. To find them together, come up with, of course, a research question and an approach with that action research idea in mind, aiming to revise a curriculum in a way that fits the needs of the future societies that those students work.
So again, I think you identified something really important, that many of the programs, that many of the universities offering international programs, they They may offer really good programs and they may be strong in research, but not in research in education. And if they don't have research in education, they do not contribute to this database of knowledge. So again, I hope it's just the beginning and that you can just close this loop and bring them on board of the joint research in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Kusurkar. She is a professor of inclusion and motivation in health professions education at Amsterdam UMC, location Free University.
Dear PhD candidate, at the outset, I would like to congratulate you and your supervisors and your family on the completion of your very interesting PhD thesis on international medical programs. I found your descriptions of conflicting ideas or discourses in international medical programs particularly fascinating. What is the need of the hour? Universal or global practitioners? Globalization or localization? All very fascinating debates. So really congratulations for this great work. From my role on your PhD Defense Committee, I would like to ask you a question on your summary chapter, and particularly something that you mentioned on page 150. That's the last sentence in your summary. You say, I would like to ask you, what do you mean with this sentence? I finally propose that further thinking and research in medical education internationalization should involve efforts towards decolonization of education and research. So my question is, what do you mean with this sentence, and how do you propose to do this in a concrete way?
Thank you for your kind words, and let me congratulate you with your recent appointment. And now I can reach out as a highly esteemed opponent to you. That's great news. Can you repeat page number? I'm sorry, then I will read with you.
150, the last sentence of your summary.
Is that 130? No. 150, thanks. Yeah, got it. My lovely paronyms help me out here. Yes, the more elaborate structure that leads up to that sentence is, of course, described in the discussion, where I reflect on, especially the last part of the research question, the how. How do international medical programs build their curricula, and what is included in there, but also what is not, and who is deciding what is important in that curriculum and who is not part of that discussion, and what is good medical education in an international context. And we found quite a few examples where participants were referring to Western developments and Western education as a good thing, and I think there's a literal quote in one of the chapters that a participant says, "I want to be more Western. That's good. That's what we're after. That's good for us. That's good for our students." And in our reflections to those chapters and in the discussion, we talked a lot about what the future of that should be and who benefits, but also what is jeopardized by that approach if we strive for one type of international Western-focused medical education. And this touches a lot upon work around neo and decolonization in higher education, also in global health, by Ellen Bleakley, for example, but also work in Taiwan with Professor Ho there. So we conclude that in all these next steps, whether that's a participatory action research approach or any thinking in these types of education, we need to take a step back and reflect on these structures that are in many places, I think, under the radar, unconsciously present before we take any next steps. And that summary sentence results from that.
So I understand when you're explaining this for the local context. For example, there is a school in Australia and they are looking at the Aboriginal people and their history and how to decolonize their education. But here you are speaking about international medical programs. So your students might go to Australia, they might go to the US, they might go to the global South countries. So how would you concretely decolonize the education? Because there are so many different non-Western perspectives. what would you include in your program? So how would you decolonize in a concrete way? That is my question.
Well, I hope that would not be just up to me, that there would be a large team with people with different backgrounds and perspectives to think along. But I'm happy to get discussing some first ideas or a first step. And one of the topics I think, for example, that is quite important here is those competencies that we talk about a lot in medical education around communication, collaboration, professionalism. They were sparked in a very Western context. They are called the CanMets for a reason. We use them a lot here as well. But what is professional and what is good collaboration and what is expected of a good communicating physician across these different contexts that students may end up in is not so often discussed. So that would definitely be something to break open, I think, and considered together, also with the students who are in that program at that moment. Maybe they already have ideas of where they want to go and practice, to not force them into our standardized or assessed ways of looking at what is professionalism and how we operationalize that in our education and how it's assessed and what they strive for, but that we are together aware that a physician who is going to practice anywhere else may have quite different roles in their consultation room, but also in the community, and to think about how we can include that better in our education would be important, I think.
I think that's really, I really like your answer, especially because you're talking about the student voice, and that is required not only in the international medical programs, it's also required in our local programs, because as you say, professionalism, in the Netherlands, being assertive is being professional, and people from other cultures find it difficult to be assertive. So it would be great to have student voice in the local programs as well. So thank you for your answer. Is it possible for me to ask another question?
Certainly.
My second question is about more about practice. And I understand that you will be starting from 1st January as the director of She Collaborates. So congratulations on that appointment. So I want to know, how has your research informed your educational practice? How do you plan to use your research findings to revise your curriculum and to integrate your thoughts on universal versus global practitioner profiles and globalization versus localization? So what is your vision for your program in the future?
Thank you for that question. Again, it's not going to be my program necessarily, but I look forward to collaborating with a lot of people in program development here in Maastricht, as well as in our global practice with which She Collaborates. And to pick up on that, I envision two things. For now, maybe more later. But two things is to even stronger engage in these similar conversations also with our partners in education development in these projects that we do, because quite often we get questions around implementing problem-based learning, for example, and we have a long-term project collaboration on how we together run this trajectory, this transformation, together with the staff, the students locally. And we do engage in discussions. What is the reason behind problem-based learning? Why would you, what are the benefits of it? What are the challenges? But we don't often ask how would problem-based learning fit your context and your practice around this university, whether that's culturally or what is the health system looks like, or the education system before. And I think we can do better in having that discussion as well in that type of work. And the second thing that I envision is to pick up on this opportunity to continue doing research in this area that so far we have not connected as much as I think the opportunities are there to continue being reflective and writing about the projects that we do from this She Collaborates team globally, and connect that to the research world, ask questions about it, and together try and share that also in the more academic debate.
Thank you so much for your answer. I give the word back to the rector.
I'll be continued by Dr. Beuken. She is a postdoctoral researcher and teacher at the School of Health Professions Education at this university.
Thank you. Dear candidates, let me start by congratulating you and saying what an honor it is to be your opponent today. I have read your thesis with great fascination. I particularly enjoyed reading your personal reflections, and I believe these are exemplary for how researchers can position themselves within their research context. The way in which you write about your research is very engaging, and please take this as an honest compliment, sparked many questions. And with this compliment, let's move on to the part we both had nightmares about. And I would like to start with something that I'm perhaps a bit skeptical about, which is the idea of a curriculum that is universal and contextually applicable at the same time, meant for both Anthony and Isabel. I have my doubts about this, and these doubts are rooted in my own research. Even in our relatively small border region, the differences in healthcare between countries are huge. If I were to educate people on all the general complexities of cross-border healthcare, it would only be interesting for people like me. And if I were to educate people on how to improve cross-border healthcare in their own context, only tailor-made education would do the job, which is only interesting for those working in that particular context. Do you really think it is possible to serve both Anthony and Isabel in the same curriculum if their aspirations are so different?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your kind words and for sharing some of the nightmares in the previous weeks. Yes, I think it is possible. I don't think it's easy, and I think one of the keys to getting there is to recognize that what Anthony and Isabel and their colleagues need may not be so different as the profiles initially suggest, and maybe as I've presented them myself. I don't think they are opposites necessarily. I've come to believe that standardization or globalization and localization should not be opposites so much, because as you certainly have seen, the differences are huge. We don't even need to cross borders to see differences. We see differences within a consultation room every day. And that's why I think if we manage to build a curriculum in a way that it's preparing all students, Anthony's, Isabel's, anyone, to be prepared for diversity in the broad sense, and actively get them practice with being exposed to different circumstances and different challenges, and reflect on those, and help them understand how that prepares them for diversity in the consultation room, but also different health systems in different countries. You equip them with the skills they need to go and practice in their envisioned locations, whether that's close to home or far away. So I think ideally, if we go beyond opposing them and seeing them as opposites, but connecting them and seeing where they actually have quite similar needs, even though they are different persons with different ambitions, that might be the key to part of that answer. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Then I have another question that is maybe a bit related to that, which is that I did read your thesis as a collection of opposites, right? So global versus local, universal versus specialized, and Isabel versus Anthony. And in a way, I like these opposites. They're easy to understand because you do either A or B. But I'm quite sure, and you kind of confirmed that thought already, that if I would ask you, is it that simple, you would say no. So I'm curious to hear why you choose to present these opposites in your thesis and not use a more nuanced alternative for that. What is the reasoning behind that?
Two things, two reasons. One reason is that this is the language that is being used in the debate so far. It's the literature that talks about these opposites and choosing between one or the other, and the arguments for one or against the other. And so to align my work with those other studies was one of the reasons to use similar words. And the other thing is related to that call to action. I do have some opinions and feelings about the topic, and I want things to be discussed and thought to how to improve it and how to change it, and then a bit it may help, hopefully, to put it in kind of a strong opposite. But I recognize that then if I next go on in nuancing it, that may be a little bit confusing indeed.
Do you think there's any results or things or messages that got lost in that translation to opposites, or?
For sure, because that's what happens if you write and someone else reads it, ideas get lost, and especially someone who reads it more superficially, reading the headings, may feel this is a work of opposites, and reading the nuances that I hope to have put in the text later on may not have reached everyone, yes.
Okay, so then I'll read it once more, maybe. Bit of a burn here. If I have time for another short question, and this is about also the reuse of data in your thesis, and it's particularly about chapter 5, in which you present a reanalysis of the data you already analyzed in chapter 2 and 3. And I was wondering, I think it's a very elegant way to reuse data, but I was wondering how you, what the process was behind the decision to actually start again with this data you already had analyzed.
So the decision to use that data in chapter 2 and 3 was made up front, but during the analysis and the writing of those chapters, these diverging perspectives, as I call them later on, started to appear. And when we want to think about why these programs exist and what is their role in medical education, in the future of medical education, it's quite helpful, or it's quite unhelpful to have these perspectives blurry and a little bit mixed up, as we found after those initial chapters. So we thought it would serve the topic and the research to have a closer look at that particular question. How are these visions discussed? What is the discourse around them? And then it was valuable to include again the data that we had already with some new text that we included in that chapter too.
Okay, thank you very much. I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Krumer. She's a professor of translational ethnographies in global health and education at this university.
Dear candidate, of course, congratulations with your beautiful book, also including the team. It's of course a book on a very important topic, and you discuss very important issues. Because it brings us to something that all of us are increasingly confronted by, and that is processes of globalization. And you talk about an increased flow of people across the globe, flow of knowledge, flows of pathogens and genes, if you wish. But there is also a flow of patients that you mention. Now, your book is about the increased number of students leaving their country to study medicine somewhere else. But there's of course also a flow of patients to all kinds of parts of the world. So even doctors, you know, or young medical professionals who do not intend or are not going to move around, they will still be confronted with all the other flows. So don't you think, and can't you elaborate a little bit more than you do in your book on whether your discussions and whether your solutions and recommendations would also apply to regular curricula in the languages at students' home countries? Yeah.
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your words and for this question, which is indeed one of the reasons why this whole project started. What should medical education look like in light of globalization? And then we zoomed in on these particular programs because they've offered a quite interesting research context for the reasons I mentioned before. But I fully agree, the lessons that we take from there are not only for Anthony and Isabel, who were for whatever reason eager to travel and go and study medicine in English somewhere else. I might even argue that it's maybe even more important for the regular or normal or the standard whatever the word would be, Dutch students in this context, or Hungarian or Malaysian students in some of the other contexts, who were not so consciously choosing for an international program themselves, and were not maybe thinking about these changing perspectives, globalization, when they started studying medicine. So indeed, I would suggest that those findings definitely apply to all medical programs who feel the responsibility to engage with these changes in the world.
Okay, it's good that we agree.
Good.
I have also another question, and that is more on the theoretical level. In the beginning of your book, you claim that you'll be using critical theory, and that from that perspective you will look into privilege, neocolonialism, and issues of that kind. And since that immediately wakes me up and sparkles my interests, I was looking where you actually really do that. And the place in which you most explicitly work with critical theory is in chapter 5, where you conduct a discourse analysis on interview texts for the other two studies. And you do a discourse analysis there, and you come up with Foucauldian-based, you say? I don't know if everybody in the room knows what Foucault is, but and when I read that chapter, I think, why is this a Foucauldian analysis? Because to me, it is a way of categorizing, coding. You summarize 3 different types of opinions. You show how these opinions are mixed. Why is that Foucauldian, since Foucauldian is an analysis that really deeply looks into implicit norms and values in practices, in knowledge itself, in medical knowledge, and also how it changes and how it impacts actual social realities and practices? I don't see that so much, so why do you call that a Foucauldian analysis?
Thank you for that question. What we aim to achieve in that chapter, but I'm happy to discuss if we manage to do that, was to go a layer deeper, or at least move beyond the thematic analysis that we did on the same data set earlier, and indeed try and find more information, more examples of how power structures around these programs come at play when people think and talk about the ambitions of those programs, the visions of those programs, why are they there? Who benefits from these programs was one of the questions that guided the analysis. And maybe it was not as explicit, or maybe not as broad into the whole society around the programs as a full Foucauldian approach would have suggested. But those were that was the analysis inspired at least by that approach, to try and move beyond the themes and the structures and delve a bit deeper in what is the structures at play in the European context, in the global context. What is the European Union move towards the bachelor-master structure in Bologna? How do national policies come at play, and how does that work out in an international medical program practice where real people work on a daily basis?
Okay, well, let's discuss that later.
Thank you.
I have a third question. Is there time? Yeah. I have to look at it. Okay, you in your book you paint this opposition between a kind of a universal professional and a global physician. And the one is a person who is looking into diversity, is looking in how can we bridge different cultural backgrounds between a doctor and the patient or the local context. And the other one is more like, well, we have one set we have one body of knowledge, and that applies everywhere. And you get that both from your interviews, but also, if I understood correctly, from literature and debates in the literature. Now, from the field of global health in more recent debates on decolonizing global health and also medicine. There is a critique on how, not just in the way we deal with each other, the way we look at each other's differences in healthcare and in behaving in clinical practice, but there's also a deep debate going on how Western knowledge itself is, and how that embeds a lot of Western notions of what reality is like, and Western notions, for instance, about body-mind, also about the social versus the biological. And one of the debates is advising us, holds a plea to see how the social ends up in our bodies, and how our bodies and our biological uptake are in constant interaction with our social environment, but also how the biology creates all kinds of structures in our society. So it is a co-evolution in a way of biology and society. And I was wondering, if you take this debate and you look at this continuum or this opposite that you paint in your book, how would it fit there? And does it fit there?
Let me think about that for a second. Well, one part of the answer is that when we aim, or when we agree that we aim to prepare students for a globalizing world, it's important that we, as future physicians or in global health or any other profession for that matter, are aware of these biases and of this history of where knowledge comes from and where it stems and how that evolved, and to make that more explicit part of our education is, I think, one thing we should strive for in this particular context. How this particular example of the interaction between the social and the body fits with the universal professional and the globalized doctor is a more tricky question. I'm not sure if I come up with a full answer right here. But I can think, if I think of Isabel and Anthony, if I take those persons, I would see that Isabel, with her international ambitions and her international interests, may be more feeling in her bodily feeling, more open to those examples from her interests than Anthony, who is more focused, more dedicated to reach that profession later on. So I would imagine that those different profiles would need a different trigger or a different approach to think about these topics.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's also something that we might want to discuss in a seminar or later, so I'll be sure to invite you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that gives me the opportunity to ask a question myself. You mentioned Isabel and Anthony, and you mentioned that students may have different perspectives or purposes with their studies and with their curriculum. How could electives be used to personalize curricula and personalize education? Could you describe sort of a framework for that?
Yes, I can. Highly esteemed pro-rector, thank you for joining this discussion. I think electives indeed are the key to, a key or a part of the way forward to engaging these kind of topics in education for international students and for all students. For different reasons. One of the reasons is that the Anthonys and Isabels need those electives to as career orientation. They use it often in that way to go to a place where they may want to go and practice, to build their networks there, to see what healthcare looks like there, and to orient themselves towards practice in that potential area. So that is an important role for electives in this type of education. But the other way where electives come in, I think, very helpful is, as we use them now for some students in the master phase of medicine when they go abroad on their electives, not because they want to go and practice in Uganda or South Africa later on, but because they want that new, exciting, for most of them, experience. But if we manage to use that as a reflective tool to not just send them there on their elective and have them practice medicine and be amazed by all the differences, but also come back and reflect on those differences and compare that with what they have seen before and what that tells them about health systems disease layer, but what it also tells them about about themselves as doctors and how they behave in different environments. And if they can get to know themselves better in that way, that will help them to prepare better for work in a new practice later on if they move to a new location. So I think electives, if you keep them broad and open for them to choose where they want to go and practice, are very helpful.
Currently, we have about 25 or 30% of our time devoted to electives. Is that enough? Could you think of a curriculum consisting of nothing but electives?
I would be quite happy to consider that option. I think that offers a lot of opportunities. I do think students should definitely be involved in building that curriculum as well, because my limited experience would suggest that
Please finish your answer.
That giving no structure at all is quite overwhelming and difficult to deal with from the beginning. So that would be balanced with the students if we design that curriculum.
Okay. Emmaline Brouwer, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request you and your company to await the results of our deliberation and our return in this room.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. I know what's on the line. I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. Even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the battle once you've grown. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Mrs. Brouwer, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of a positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Dries, your supervisor, is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your promoter to now take the floor.
Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent, and responsible?
I promise that.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee present, I hereby confer upon you, Emmaline Elizabeth Brouwer, the degree of doctor and grant you all the rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present, not now, but within half a minute, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary, and the other members of the committee, and affixed with the official seal of the university.
I have always loved traveling. Dit schreef je in je persoonlijke reflectie in het proefschrift. De afgelopen jaren hadden wij, Erik en ik, de eer om met jou mee te reizen. We waren getuigen van 4 verschillende reizen die je maakte. En die reizen maakten jou tot hoe je hier nu voor ons staat. Dat zal ik toelichten. Maar eerst, beste Emmaline, is het een eer om jou, ook namens Erik, als eerste te mogen feliciteren met je promotie tot dokter in de wetenschappen. Ook feliciteren we jouw 3 mannen, Roel, Manuel en Ruben, en je ouders, je familie en je schoonfamilie. 4 reizen. Ik begin niet met jouw letterlijke reizen, die met het vliegtuig en de trein, maar met jouw reis als onderzoeker. Jouw letterlijke reizen stonden echter wel aan het begin van jouw avontuur als onderzoeker. Toen we mogelijke onderwerpen en vraagstellingen voor jouw promotieonderzoek bespraken, zei je: ik wil wel iets onderzoeken dat nuttig is voor mijn werk. Voor jouw internationale werk, voor She Collaborates en voor het onderwijs dat je gaf in het internationale geneeskundeprogramma. En zo kwam je bij het ITM, het International Track in Medicine, als onderzoekscontext. En ontwikkelde je je ideeën verder tot een volwaardig PhD-onderzoeksvoorstel dat het ITM in een bredere context plaatste. Je was en bent daarmee een pionier in het kritisch onderzoeken van international medical programs en hebt vandaag wederom het nut van je onderzoek voor je werk bewezen en voor het werk van vele anderen. In je proefschrift reflecteer je zelf ook op jouw reis als onderzoeker en hoe je van het zoeken naar de waarheid bent bewogen naar het omarmen van subjectiviteit, complexiteit en relativiteit. En daarmee gepaardgaande ontwikkelde je een zelfvertrouwen als onderzoeker. Typisch Emmaline is dat je alles van alle kanten bekijkt, over alle nuances nadenkt, alles overlegt en bespreekt, iedereen betrekt in de besluitvorming. Samenwerken zit in jouw natuur. Maar als karttrekker van je eigen promotieproject ontdekte je ook dat jij soms degene moet zijn die de beslissing neemt. Die de knoop doorhakt tussen opties die allemaal hun voor- en nadelen hebben. En in de eerste jaren wilde je die final decisions het liefst altijd met iedereen gezamenlijk nemen. Maar met je groeiend zelfvertrouwen als onderzoeker voelde je je steeds comfortabeler bij de rol als leider van je eigen project. En uiteraard blijf je ook als leider een samenwerker en blijf je de nuances en verschillende perspectieven belichten. Daarnaast ben je een talent in schrijven en ingewikkelde zaken helder op papier krijgen. Daar konden wij jou tijdens je reis als onderzoeker vrijwel niets meer over bijbrengen. En hetzelfde geldt voor je reflectievermogen. Je besef dat deze reis niet af is en dat je vandaag op een tussenstation gearriveerd bent, is daar een voorbeeld van. Weliswaar ligt het tussenstation op een hele mooie plek, waar we met z'n allen vandaag een heel groot feest gaan vieren, maar de reis gaat daarna weer verder, met onbekende, maar ongetwijfeld grootse bestemmingen. Dan naar jouw tweede reis, de letterlijke. Tussen de vele bestemmingen die je bezocht, was jouw grootste reis van de afgelopen jaren natuurlijk die naar Portugal. Technisch gezien waren het vele kleine reisjes met het vliegtuig heen en weer tussen Lissabon en Nederland, maar in zijn geheel was het een ervaring die niet weg te denken is uit je promotietraject en je persoonlijke leven. Je kende er hoogtepunten en dieptepunten. Je genoot van de Portugese bica's en vinho's, de stad en de kust en lekker aan je onderzoek werken in je tuintje onder de Portugese zon. Maar de Portugese lockdowns waren niet mild. En het was soms een worsteling om zo geïsoleerd aan je onderzoek te werken of er überhaupt tijd voor te kunnen vinden te midden van alle uitdagingen. Helemaal Emmaline accepteerde je de moeilijke momenten die er ook bij horen. En vaak lukte het je om je op de dingen te richten die je goede energie gaven. En die waren er. En dat brengt mij tot jouw derde reis. Je reis naar het moederschap. Jaren geleden was je nog niet helemaal zeker over je kinderwens. Maar toen je merkte dat jonge moeders om je heen toch leuke mensen bleven die niet alleen maar de hele tijd over hun kinderen praten, zag je het steeds meer zitten. Vervolgens, als twee absolute hoogtepunten in je Portugese jaren, waren daar je prachtige zonen Manuel en Ruben. Hoewel het zeker in tijden van lockdown een enorme uitdaging kon zijn om het moederschap te combineren met promoveren, brachten jouw twee mannetjes zoveel vreugde, geluk en energie. Heerlijk om chocoladetaarten te bakken, samen wandelen door het park in Lissabon, Portugese woordjes leren, weekendjes naar de kust met z'n vieren. Je was helemaal om en je geniet van je reis als moeder. Maar ook van die als mens. Nee, ik ga hier niet alleen over de kinderen praten. Want naast je kinderen vul je je vrije tijd met lekker koken, heerlijke etentjes, wijntjes, vrienden opzoeken. Je padelcarrière zal ik maar even achterwege laten. Als geen ander beheers jij de kunst om te weten wanneer je moet afschakelen van werk en onderzoek. En nog beter, je weet hoe dat moet. Uiteraard zijn er de usual frustraties en uitdagingen, maar je straalt als moeder en als mens. En dat komt je werk ten goede en dat brengt me tot je vierde reis, die naar het directeurschap van She Collaborates. Je staat nu aan het roer van het team waarvan je al jarenlang onderdeel bent als projectmanager. En ook hierin zul je stralen en alle ervaringen uit jouw andere reizen in meenemen. Je onderzoek naar fenomenen die relevant zijn voor het werk van She Collaborates, je letterlijke reizen waarin je ziet wat er speelt over de grenzen, je kwaliteiten op het gebied van samenwerken, verbinden, nuanceren, reflecteren, doorzetten, afschakelen en genieten, komen allemaal samen in deze rol. De komende jaren reis je verder als onderzoeker, moeder, mens, projectmanager en directeur. En ik denk dat ik ook voor Erik en andere mensen in de zaal spreek als ik zeg dat wij graag tot jouw reisgezelschap blijven behoren. We have always loved traveling with Emmaline.
Dr. Brouwer, namens de gehele universitaire gemeenschap, feliciteer ik u van hartelijk met het behaalde resultaat. We hebben vandaag genoten, we hebben van uw boekje genoten en ik neem aan dat er de rest van de dag ook nog genoten wordt. Ik betrek in mijn felicitaties graag Roel en de jongens en de verdere familie en vrienden. En ik sluit zo direct deze ceremonie, maar ik heb daarna nog een paar huishoudelijke mededelingen. Dit was dus het sluiten. De huishoudelijke mededelingen, wij blijven nog even hier voor een paar fotomomenten. De zaal, behalve Roel, want die houden we er graag hierbij. De zaal mag alvast naar de refter gaan waar de receptie zal zijn. En wij voegen ons zo snel mogelijk, dat is na een minuut of 5, ook bij u. Ik wens u allen een fijne dag.
Moet ik dat doen? Ja, dat dacht ik. Ik dacht dat hij dat ging doen. Ja, daarom was ik een beetje in de war. Ik dacht, moet ik